Welcome to Mrs. Neller's notes for her pre-calculus class. These are the notes for section 5.3, day 3, entitled Trigonometric Graphs. And today we're going to talk mostly about how you can use your graphing calculator to help you graph these trig functions. And when you're using your graphing calculator, you may have to make sure that you adjust the viewing rectangle in order to see the graph reasonably. So that's kind of the focus of today's notes, is not so much how to type it into your graphing calculator, but knowing how to adjust the window appropriately. So for example 6 here, they want us to graph the function sine of 50x in an appropriate viewing rectangle. Okay, so you could write down a few things that we've talked about in the previous sections of notes. We know that we would have an amplitude of 1. There's a little invisible 1 in front of the sign there. So absolute value of 1 is just 1. Okay. You could also say that your period is going to be 2 pi over 50. So that's really pi over 25, which as a decimal is 0.126. Now, that can be helpful because that can allow you to zoom in on the viewing rectangle and see exactly what's going on. Okay, so now that we know that our amplitude is 1 and our period is 0.126, if you go to your graphing calculator and you type in y equals the sine of 50x, you might see a whole bunch of different stuff. Okay, you might get some little curve. You might get a bunch of crazy curves. You might get a really thick curve, or you might get some kind of little swoopy. Okay, so if you go to your graphing calculator and you go to y equals and type in sine of 50x, remember sine is right above the 7, it's a couple buttons above the 7, and then 50, and then you want to hit the x button as well. Now, if you just graph this, if you do zoom 6, and you just graph a standard graph, this is what you'll see. Okay, so that's kind of like what we had in our slide here. Okay, just kind of a very gentle curve. Now, the reason you're seeing this is because of your mode. There's a difference in your mode. When we're graphing in these functions, we want to be in radian mode. Okay, so go to mode, arrow down until radian is shaded, and then hit enter. And then if you go back to your graph, oh, now we start to see some of that craziness that the slide had on there. Okay, so that's that zigzaggy craziness like they show in example B there. So we knew that our amplitude was 1 and our period was 0.126. So we could adjust the windows on our calculator accordingly. Okay, so if we adjust it, our height is 1, so maybe do 1.5 or even do 2 for your y min and your y max. You could do positive 2 and negative 2. They have positive 1.5 and negative 1.5. Okay, but right here, there's our amplitude. That's our amplitude of 1. Okay, and then we go down to negative 1. And then they have zoomed in really, really close. It's 0.25. So that way they can see a couple of periods. Okay, our period was 0.126. So to go up and then down and then back up right to there, that should be 0.126. So they want to see a couple of those cycles. Okay, so 0.12 and 0.12, that's about 0.24. so they made it 0.25 just to make it a little bit bigger. Okay, you could make it 1, you could make it -1 if you didn't want to do decimals. Okay, so if we go to our window, we can adjust that. Okay, we can make our x minimum. Let's just do -1. Just do whole numbers. And our x max could be 1. And then our y minimum, let's do -2. And then our max is 2. And then we'll go to our graph. So there it's a little more zoomed in. It's still pretty dense. Still a lot of zigzags up and down. It's not as nice as what the book shows here. Okay, there's a zoomed in even more, so there's definitely more space between each of the periods. Okay, so we could adjust our window even more if we wanted to. We could do 0.5 and -0.5. Whoops. Oops, I put min and max backwards. -0.5. There we go. And then 0.5. Okay. There we go. So now we're starting to get a little more space in between our maximums and our minimums in our graph. Okay, so now that looks a little bit more like what the book had. Okay. There's one other thing I want to show you on the graphing calculator that's really, really nice. If you don't want to spend a whole lot of time adjusting the window so you get a good view of the graph, the graphing calculator does have a trig function in the graph. So if you do zoom 7, that will zoom in and give you the nicest graph possible right away. Now, sometimes you don't know then what the settings are, but if you go to Window, it'll give you the settings. Now the calculator is going to be super duper precise and they're going to have lots of decimals, okay? But if you do zoom 7, that's your trig functions, so you can see those trig graphs. And then if you do window, you can adjust the window automatically, or you can see how the calculator adjusted it as well. Okay, so those are a couple little tips for you as you're practicing more of these functions where you're graphing so that you can see them on a graphing calculator. Okay, the odd ones are in the back of the book, so definitely check those. The couple evens that you have, those are worked out in the binder in the classroom, so take a look there if you have questions on 28 and 40 and 38. And if you have any other questions, stop on by before school and see me.